Welcome everyone to another video session of free answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. We are going to see GS4 and specifically we are going to see probity in governance, where we have concept of public service, philosophical basis of governance and probity, information sharing and transparency in government, RTI, code of ethics, code of conduct, citizen charters, work culture, quality of service delivery, utilization of public funds, challenges of corruption. We're going to see two questions from the same and one question from the current affairs. Let us see the overview of those questions. The very first question we have is about probity, how it is significant for governance, and what are the kind of steps that can we inculcate to ensure there is probity in young public servants. Second question is about corruption. It's a quote by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. Over here, we are going to see how corruption is a product of greed, and to eliminate that, we need to have what can I give spirit. The third question is current affair based question, where we are going to see that recently there was approval of treatment of sickle cell disease in United Kingdom and how exactly that can help India. We are going to see specifically gene editing therapy and challenges involved with the same. So let us start with question number 1. Let's read the question number 1 together. Recognized probity is the surest of all oaths. What do you understand by the term probity? Explaining its significance in governance, bring out the steps that can be taken to instill the virtue of probity in young public servants. So in this question, we have given a mini quote, which is recognized probity is the surest of all oaths. This encompasses the kind of significance that probity has with respect to not just governance, but overall. We have to define the term and we have to talk about the significance of probity in governance. So this is going to be our heading 1 of the body, and then we will be writing about the steps in heading 2 to ensure we can instill the virtue of probity in young civil servants, public servants. So let us start the answer structure. In the introduction, you can either define the term probity, which is adherence to the highest principles and ideals, which translates into uprightness. You can also explain the quote as in recognized probity is surest of all oaths. We might take a lot of different kind of oath, but if we have recognized that a person is having probity, then we do not need to take any kind of oath with respect to their responsibility and accountability. However, we also can write certain examples, like you can talk about CAG, ex-CAG Vinod Rai, and how he ensured that there is element of probity in the governance as well as in the functioning of the entire CAG. You can talk about essentiality of probity in governance in brief in the introduction, as in talk about how it ensures there is corruption-free environment, there is effective legal framework, there is comprehensive rules and regulations, implementation of law is fair, and there is discipline through law enforcement, and at the end there is holistic view of the effective governance. So this is something which is essentiality of probity and governance. You can give brief about the same in the introduction, either through a small mini paragraph or through mind map. So that is there for the introduction. Now let us see in the body, where we will be dealing with the significance of probity in governance. Firstly, probity helps with respect to prevention of corruption. We can talk about that there are certain civil servants who ensure that there is proper transparency, integrity in the entire governance mechanism, and because of that there is minimal chances of leakages, as in corruption. You can talk about example of Ashok Khemka, who ensured that there is transparency in the government and any kind of corruption, any degree of corruption was exposed by him, such as exposing land schemes. So that is something you can write in the first point of this body heading. Second, you can talk about how it improves service delivery through probity. We are making sure that probity is inculcated in the entire process. People who are part of the entire process, who are given the responsibility to deliver the public services, they ensure integrity is there, as well as professionalism, responsibility and uprightness. We have seen that how Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he ensured that probity helped with respect to revolutionizing defense and education. So these are the kind of examples that you can cite in your answer. The third is strengthening the rule of law. Over here, we are making sure that the person in charge definitely translates the rule into practice. We have seen how IAS U Sagayam over here, he ensured that the value of probity helps the entire system with respect to upholding the justice. And lastly, you can talk about how ensuring social justice through ethical conduct can also be realized through probity. Probity ensures that whatever value you have, you are practicing those values, you are in resonance with all those values in your action. We have seen that how Armstrong Palme, who witnessed that there are certain kind of challenges with respect to connectivity in the tribal region, so he proactively took some steps to bridge those gaps. He fundraised so that he can create that kind of infrastructure. He built the capacity of the local people, and that is how probity in governance helps with respect to overall development of the region as well as of the nation. So that is there in the heading 1 of the body. Now let us move on to the heading 2, which is the steps that can be taken to instill the virtue of probity in young public servants. Over here, you can firstly talk about that how probity, the education part, the importance of probity education as in the capacity building, the training of civil servant is necessary. We have seen certain examples such as Vigilance Awareness Week by CVC. This kind of recurring events held by the organization can help with respect to not just the awareness but also with respect to the practice, how to practice those kind of values in the system, as in the simulation of the same. So importance of probity education is there, which is kind of a primary step that need to be taken. The second is establishment of code of conduct. We have seen there are certain code of conduct which helps with respect to the behavioral part. We have also seen there are certain code of ethics which ensures that certain ethical foundational values are imbibed in the civil servants so that the entire mechanism of the governance translates into good governance. The next is encouraging accountability in the government through legal mechanisms. We have seen that how Prevention of Corruption Act helps with respect to deterrence of any kind of anomaly as in corruption, and thus helps a civil servant with respect to realizing the probity. The last is leading by example in public services. We have seen that the leadership is a primary quality, a foundational value for a civil servant. Through leadership, they can encompass that whatever values they are practicing, those values are also translated further to the junior level as well as to the entire institution, so that leading by example can help with respect to realization of probity in governance. Cultivating a culture of ethical behavior is one of the example of the same. Now that is there in the heading 2 of the body, you can write. Let us see the conclusion. Conclusion over here, you can talk about how this entire question helps with respect to learning for civil services. Over here, you can talk about that probity helps with respect to creating legitimacy and credibility, which directly translates into trust from public. Now that kind of trust helps any civil servant with respect to implementation of difficult projects. You can talk about how Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which required higher degree of behavioral nudge. Over here, if a civil servant who is recognized for his probity, for her or his probity, they can approach the community and can put forward their ideas, because over here people, they have a certain higher degree of trust and thus they will be ready to accept those reforms. So this is how you can inculcate those learning for a civil servant in the conclusion. So this is for question number 1. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we structure our answer for answer writing. In the introduction, you can define the probity, you can talk about the example as in Vinod Rai, the ex-CAG, as well as you can talk about some prerequisites of probity and the impact of probity through a mind map. Then you can talk about the significance of probity in governance. You can list down the significance along with certain examples to enrich your entire dimension. Then you can talk about the steps as in measures to instill the virtue of probity in young public servants. Over here, you can talk about different suggestions as well as give certain example to back those suggestions. And at the end, you can talk about the learnings for civil services as well as you can talk about the benefits, the impact of probity for the entire governance as well as the nation. So that is there for question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2. What do the mentioned quotation conveys to you in the present context? We have seen that UPSC asks 3 quotation based questions where we have a fixed demand, which is what exactly that the quotation conveys to you in the present context. So whatever quote that you are reading, you have to decipher the same, understand through breaking the entire quote, and give significance for the same in the present context. So understand, you have to give good amount of proof points. Let us start with this quote. Corruption comes from the never-ending greed. The fight for the corruption-free ethical society will have to be fought against this greed and replace it with what can I give spirit. This quote was given by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. So over here, we will firstly in the introduction give a brief meaning of the quote. The quote specifically is very much transparent in its definition, as in it is asking and saying that corruption is a product of never-ending greed. As in greed, it produces corruption. And we do understand that this is again a vicious cycle, as in greed will lead to corruption and corruption will further lead to the augmentation of the greed. Now, for a corruption-free ethical society, we have to fight against this factor, the value of greed, and that can only be fought when we inculcate the spirit of what can I give, right? So over here, we are looking at certain kind of proactiveness from people where their attitude shift is visible such that they show the spirit of giving rather than just taking, which is an aspect of greed. So this is something in brief you can explain in the introduction. Now let us see in the body part, how can we inculcate the demand of this question. Firstly, in the heading 1, you can talk about that greed leads to corruption, which is what will I get attitude. Now this kind of innovative headings can definitely attract the person who is evaluating your answer and give them a certain degree of structure for your answer. So do try to be innovative, but be minimal in your words, as in you do not have more than 2 lines for introduction. Then in the heading 1, you can give certain kind of arguments through example. You can talk about that how greed leads to desire for materialistic gain. Now that materialistic gain, that pursuit of getting the materialistic gain will lead to certain kind of behavior which might be anomaly. A person might choose wrong means to achieve those kind of materialistic gain, and that will lead to corruption. The second is abuse of office for personal gain. We have seen that how people who acquire certain kind of power through their office can often sometimes behave in such a way that is unethical and can use the same for personal gain. Third is false perception of success. In the society, we have tagged success as in materialistic gains and materialistic successes. Now that kind of status attachment to materialistic gain can also make a person tilt towards unethical behavior such as corruption. Then the next is selfishness leading to corruption. Now greed is something when we see is what will I get. Now that kind of selfishness will also lead to corruption. Not just corruption with respect to the monetary, but also moral and spiritual corruption. Over here, you have multiple examples to cite. In the first, desire for materialistic gain, you can cite Sam Bankman-Fried of FTS Exchange. The person used unethical means to acquire the kind of wealth that he built through that organization, which finally collapsed because of the greed. You can also talk about abuse of office for personal gain. We have seen multiple public scams like Colgate scam, 2G Spectrum, Commonwealth Games scam. Over here we have seen that how the Commonwealth, as in the public's fund, was utilized for personal gain. You can also talk about false perception of success, how Vijay Mallya took loans and never paid them back, as in creating the menace of NPAs. Over here, he was trying to live a very much of a grand life at public. He was trying to live very much of a grand life through false perception, through giving false perception of success. So you can give that kind of examples over here. Now let's see the heading 2. Heading 2, you can talk about the second part, which is replacing the greed with what can I give spirit, as in how the entire root of corruption, which was greed, can be eliminated through the spirit of what can I give. Over here, you can talk about selflessness service. We can also give example of Nishkam Karma. You do not worry about the product, you only worry about the efforts that you are giving, so that you can make sure that the what can I give spirit is realized. The next is compassion. You have to operate with compassion, as in you must act in such a way that you're helping the society to be better. The people who do not have the privilege to access certain resources, you help them through compassion. We have seen example of Mother Teresa over here. Next is empathy. Empathy as in at least understanding the feeling of a person who is going through certain kind of pain. Now over here, you're also engaging with that person emotionally. So there is a give and take of emotions. So that kind of bandwidth can also help with respect to elimination of corruption. Next is self-sufficiency as in sustainability. Instead of achieving for excess, the materialistic gain that we are talking about, how we are operating with a consumeristic behavior. Instead of that, thinking about sustainability, only asking for the things that you need, not what you want, is also kind of a pathway through which we can go ahead with what can I give spirit and eliminate the element of greed. And next is, we also have to understand the upbringing and education for values. We must be constantly imbibing values which operate with that kind of spirit, as in what can I give spirit, the compassionate spirit, the empathy, the idea of seva. So those values can be inculcated to ensure that the socialization process of children have the idea of what can I give spirit. So we can eliminate the idea of greed itself at the initial levels. So that is there for the heading 2 of the body. Let us see the conclusion. Conclusion over here, you can talk about either learning for the civil services, or you can talk about the contemporary society. For the civil services, you can talk about that they must operate such kind of values where they are not looking for personal gain, but only making sure that their professional responsibilities are realized. Public service welfare, which is the primary goal of civil servant, is also at the center of the entire value system. So that is something over here you can write for the learnings for civil services. And for contemporary society, we can talk at large that how people should always understand that they should operate with the kind of what can I give attitude, so that the entire society can benefit at large. At the end, we can talk about that how operating with that kind of value will eliminate the need of corruption, because the greed itself will be eliminated at this point. So this is how you can conclude with for the quotation based answers for question number 2. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we structure our answer for writing practice. In the introduction, you can give a brief about the entire quote. In the body, you can break the quote in 2 parts, as in how greed leads to corruption, the what will I get attitude, list down different dimensions with examples, and next you talk about how replacing the greed with what can I give attitude, list down the different kind of dimensions and give example of the same, and at the last you can talk about the conclusion where you are specifically targeting the learnings for civil services as well as for the contemporary society. So that is there for question number 2. Let's see question number 3. Let's read the question number 3 together. Treatment of sickle cell disease underscores the importance of advancing medical research for ultimately finding a cure. In light of the recent advancement made in the treatment of sickle cell disease, explain the gene editing therapy along with challenges involved. Now this question is conceptually asking about gene editing with the help of recent current affair that happened with respect to the treatment of sickle cell disease. We have seen that how UK has recently approved a gene therapy for sickle cell anemia treatment, which offers hope for Indian patient. Now, this specific treatment was done through a drug called Casgave, which uses the innovative gene editing tool called CRISPR-Cas9. So, over here in the question, you have the opportunity in the introduction to talk about the recent news as well as give context, as in talk about the sickle cell disease. You can talk about how it is hereditary in nature, it is predominant among tribals community. One in 86 of the tribal members are unfortunately affected by this kind of disease. You can talk about how it has certain kind of process where abnormal hemoglobin gene inheritance goes through, where the oxygen transportation can be hampered, as well as it can transform with respect to multiple other issues. You can talk about how it leads to pain with respect to different body parts as well as anemia. So you can give a brief idea about sickle cell disease, about the recent current affairs, and context that how India also faces a large issue of sickle cell disease. On an average, there are more than 40,000 cases of sickle cell disease in India per year. So that is something in the introduction you can encompass. In the body, you have to explain the gene therapy and give challenges with respect to the same. So let us go to the first heading of the body part, where you will be talking about the gene therapy, because it is the process through which we are trying to eliminate the sickle cell disease. You can draw the diagram to give the overview of how exactly we are using the gene technology. You can also give the same in the point wise, but you can use this kind of secondary information in the diagram to make sure that answer looks holistic. Firstly, the gene editing therapy helps with respect to the identification of the mutation in the gene, as in specifically we are talking about the HBB gene. Then we can talk about how CRISPR-Cas9, which is a gene editing tool, helps with respect to the precise editing of the mutated gene so that that can be eliminated and replaced with a natural repair process activation that can lead to further restoring healthy hemoglobin production. So this is how the entire gene editing process looks for the sickle cell disease. The next we have to deal with is the heading 3. Over here, we will be talking about the challenges involved with respect to gene editing technology. Firstly, there is ethical challenge, as we do not know the entirety of effects of gene editing technology on human. So there are certain experts who have raised voice against that kind of intervention, as that can lead to certain kind of unethical issues. Second is off-targeting effect. We do understand from certain experiment that by targeting certain kind of DNA, we can create certain kind of ripples, as in the elimination of disease. However, if the process is not accurate and there are certain kind of off-target issues that can impact the human body in a different way, which research shows that we have not considered at large. The third is long-term safety concern. We have done research with respect to limited time frame, and we do not understand that how specifically modifying that part of the gene can have certain long-term impact, which can also give certain kind of other health disorder. And lastly is delivery mechanism. Now, as we have seen that how gene editing is a very complicated technology and process, and there are certain kind of mechanisms which are costly as well as inaccessible to large masses. So we have issue with respect to the technology part as well as issue with respect to accessibility of those technology. So those are the challenges. In the conclusion, you have the opportunity to talk about way ahead, as in the measures. You can talk about how scientific and technological advancement need to be taken care so that we can understand the holistic impact as well as long-term impact of the gene editing technology. Next is ethical consideration and public engagement. We must ensure that the public at large, all the stakeholders are involved to ensure that ethical processes are adopted. Whatever gene technology we are looking at is adopted for ethical processes. As in, we have seen that there are certain kind of unethical events that can also happen, such as designer babies, etc. So those kind of unethical divergence is not realized and ethical issues and processes are solved. Next is clinical trial and post-market surveillance. Over here, we are making sure that proper clinical trials are happening and post-market surveillance to understand the impact of gene editing for long term is also done. And lastly, focused mission to eliminate the sickle cell anemia by 2047. India has certain kind of, government of India has set certain kind of goals for elimination of sickle cell by 2047. Now, we must adopt this kind of technology to ensure that the sickle cell anemia disease is eliminated by 2047. So this is something in the conclusion you can write for question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we structure our answer for better answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can talk about the sickle cell disease, you can talk about the recent current affairs, you can give how exactly sickle cell is impacting what kind of numbers in India. Then in the body part, the main demand is the process of gene editing therapy. You can list down the process, you can also draw certain diagrams to enrich the presentation of your answer. Then in the challenges involved, you list down all the challenges, you elaborate all the challenges to give a very explicit understanding, and in the conclusion, you talk about certain measures to tackle all those challenges. So that is there for question number 3. Your writing for answer writing program of Vajiram and Ravi, where in this month we are doing GS4. In the next month, we are going to start GS1. You can check out the schedule in the portal, which you can access through vajiramis.com. You can also see the questions and write answers over there by uploading the same. You can see the model answers and video discussion over here in the YouTube channel. Check out the description for the model answers. If you want to go very extensive with respect to your test preparation, the mains preparation, Vajiram and Ravi is also launching mains intensive test series, where you will be writing 38 tests throughout the year so that you are mains ready. The program is online and offline both, so you can be mains ready from anywhere. So that's it for today's session. Keep writing. Thank you so much.